It's time for a reality check.
We're here to deconstruct health and fitness trends and provide tangible advice so you can become 1% better with each choice starting today. Welcome back to this episode of Reality Check. We are your hosts, Jess and Jill, and today we are going to talk about how to build just your hottest, leanest, most toned physique. Everyone loves that word. But we get a lot of questions surrounding specifically what training should look like when you're trying to build your physique, right? Like women want to look lean and they want, a smaller waist and bigger butt or whatever it is, right? Like more of the hourglass figure is kind of what we're talking about. It's just like building the body you want based on what your starting point is. And, obviously there's all the nuances of nutrition, but we want to specifically talk about the training component and what that looks like and how we program and some of like our favorite exercises to use based on building out like certain body parts. So we'll kind of talk about like the way that we train and what we do too. So I know kind of kicking that off that a lot of times when we get these questions, it's surrounding that very big misconception that you can spot reduce body fat, right? Like I see, and I used to be guilty of this, but people who want to lose belly fat are just doing crunches. They think that like if they are like working that body part and it hurts and it's sore, that it's obviously like burning something or changing it right in that form. And obviously that's not true. So we want to talk about how you can specifically build out certain areas of your body based on the way that you train. It's not building body fat, it's building muscle, which is going to likely achieve the result that you're looking for if you're dieting correctly and all of that. So we're going to kind of talk about that whole process, essentially.
Yeah, I feel like we could almost title this episode like how to get rid of the mom pooch or the bat wings. Like I feel like those are the questions that we get a lot are what exercise should I do for ABC body fat, which nobody likes the answer, but it is what it is. Like you cannot spot reduce body fat. So the cool part is you can spot and target build your muscle and sculpt yourself in that way. Which again, I think a lot of women think like, okay, well, I just want to get smaller, right? Well, we can actually create this illusion of a smaller waist by building things like your glutes and your hamstrings and your quads and your lats and your shoulders. And again, women, I think in general tend to think like, oh no, I don't want a bulky looking upper body. I don't want to build muscle up there. And it's like, no matter your starting point, these tips that we're going to talk you through today are going to allow you to look more feminine and like curves in the right places and that sort of thing. And then yes, someday when you then go into a deficit to kind of like chisel away the body fat on top, you will have that more lean toned look. So again, you cannot spot reduce body fat. I'm going to say it a million times. No matter how many crunches you do, you can build up the ab muscles that are underneath. You cannot lose body fat from doing crunches. You cannot lose body fat on the back of your arms from doing tricep kickbacks. If you're spending all your time in the gym focusing on those small little muscle groups, you are not going to get the return on investment in your time. Really, it's kind of a waste of time. So, okay. First and foremost, like we want to lift and prioritize the big muscles, right? So we always talk about the big five, meaning, and any trainer will know that these are kind of foundational for movements, for functional movement too, not just for aesthetics and physique, but you want to squat, you want to hinge, meaning like deadlift or hip thrust or do good mornings, things like that. So squat, hinge, push, meaning bench presses or push-ups, pull, rows, lat pull downs, pull ups. And then I like to add overhead presses or overhead movements in this, again, both aesthetically for your shoulders and looking like you have toned arms, but also functionally so that you can like keep reaching up into cabinets as you go into old age someday, right? So those 5 things are at the core of all of our programming. And they're hitting big muscle groups. So it's kind of like twofold. One, we're talking to you guys, right, about like, wow, if you build those, it will physically, over time, it takes a very long time to build muscle, first of all. It's not like you're just going to pack on inches in muscle. But over time, you will feel more toned and curvy in the right places. The second piece of this is if we can spend all of our time training, whether we're in a fat loss phase or a muscle building phase, if all of our training is spent trying to build these big muscles, it speeds up our base metabolic rate. We end up burning more calories all the time, so it makes it easier to keep body fat off. Whereas if we just spend time trying to burn calories in the gym or isolating those smaller muscle groups, you will not speed your metabolism up as much. So again, it's just more effective all around in both sculpting and chiseling your body and in getting your body to become like a calorie burning machine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I think too, so many women train, we think we want more, we want faster results. That means we have to train more or train with like higher intensity or burn more calories or move faster, right? Shorter rest periods. I also used to do that, right? I used to like superset everything. And obviously supersetting has a time and a place, a lot of things in programming do, but we think we need to do more to look leaner or achieve the look that we want. And, I have this conversation with women too, and that they're like, I just want to lose another like 10 pounds. And a lot of times that last like 10 pounds that you want to lose is not usually going to be like sustainable for you long term. Like usually we can't maintain as lean of a physique, especially as women, as we think we can from a hormone health standpoint too, right? And just sustainability. But a lot of times we think we need to do more. And usually it's just that we need to build more muscle. And that training, 6 days a week in boot camps and things like that isn't actually what's going to get you what you want. So recovery, I think, is obviously this is a whole other conversation we can have too, but recovery is usually a very overlooked component. So when we're talking about this, typically what I like to see is 4 days a week. I think that's a really good sweet spot, especially for like an intentional building phase. 3 is good if you're programming like correctly and efficiently and all of those things. So I think 3 to 4 days a week of training is fair with the right programming, and then having those recovery days built in too. So we'll talk about also kind of how you can break up your training. I mean, typically with 3 days, I like to see 3 full body personally, maybe a full body and like a push or a pull or an upper and a lower.
Agreed.
But usually that's how I like to split up 3. And then 4, obviously you can have a little bit more fun, and maybe you're doing like chest and triceps run day. Like you can do body part split. It's funny, my bodybuilding background, that was all that I did and all that I trained. And I just 5 days a week was what I did. But you can do that. And obviously it can be efficient just as long as you're using or implementing the right amount of volume based on, each body part and each lift, and making sure you're hitting all those muscle groups. And
if you're consistent, because again, like you did that during a bodybuilding season of life where that was the center of your world, right? Mm-hmm. For most women, they'll tell us like, yeah, I'll train 5 or 6 days a week, whatever gets me the results faster. And our question is always like, yeah, but what can you do on your worst week? Because if you can only do that for 2 or 3 months, like reel it back. We can get really, really effective programming in 3 to 4 days a week. I personally train 3 full body days a week, and it might look like 1 full body day, 1 push pull, or it might look like 3 of those days we just talked about with those 5 big lifts. Different variations of them, right? Like maybe one day I'm doing a back squat. Maybe one day I'm doing walking lunges as my squat movement. Maybe one day I'm doing step ups, but I'm able to hit those things with enough total volume through the week. And it gives my body that time to recover and my muscles that actual time to build, where it's more effective. If I were grinding and overloading them, you're not going to see those results if your body doesn't have time to heal and recover from the stressor that you just put on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, we're talking about that volume too. You can, and as women, obviously we know too, typically what type of physique someone is looking for as a female, right? Like we want to look lean. We want to have a smaller waist. We want like a big lifted, butt and all this stuff. So you can, if you're working on a specific body part. Jess and I were actually talking about like what we personally do specifically in like present day in terms of like adding additional volume to our workout routine. But I have always done additional shoulder exercises, like in terms of volume throughout my week of lifts. It's just like the bodybuilder in me. My husband actually always jokes that I can like lateral raise like just a large amount of weight. Like he's like, I don't even know if I can lift as much as you can, but I do it. And it's just very strong for me. There's just something I like and I have fun with it. He also jokes too that like whenever I'm like, I don't know what I'm training in the gym today, and he's like, shoulders. I'm sure you'll do shoulders. You're probably going to do shoulders today. But it's just my favorite thing to do. And then same with like glutes. For me, hamstrings specifically tend to be a weak point. So my leg days are usually focused more on like posterior chain, where I'm very quad dominant, right? So like that's what we're always looking at when we're talking about building things out in a certain way, right? Like sculpting a specific body part essentially. Now, when I diet down and reduce body fat, it will show, right? All of the efforts that I put into those specific body parts a lot more when I'm leaner and I'm just having less body fat over top of those muscles. But you can add additional volume to, certain muscle groups week over week. That doesn't mean go train glutes every single day and never recover and never do anything else, right? There's a limit to that also.
But hitting them 2 or 3 times a week, if it's an area you absolutely want to build, hitting them 2 or 3 times a week is appropriate. Like, that's great. You have to have rest days in between. Don't go try to grind out 5-6 days a week hitting that same muscle group, or 2 days of like 20 hardworking sets per muscle group. Like, that's too much also. But if you have an appropriate amount of sets and weight and you're progressively overloading, 2 or 3 days a week is great for something you want to build. We also try to achieve overall balance and function. So like, my chest is not something I want to build at this point in my life, right? But it was fun for a while. Like, I have pretty defined, I would say like, I don't know, it looks like delicate chiseled around my collarbone and stuff from bench pressing a lot and doing a lot of push-ups and stuff. Now I'm at this place where I'm like, well, I don't need to build that, but I still do it once a week. So once a week is a maintaining balance thing. 2 to 3 times a week with appropriate progression and rest is if you specifically want to build. And again, I think a lot of women think that they want to build something and it's actually the wrong thing in terms of overall balance. So like, I agree with Jill in terms of shoulders, and maybe it's because of the programming that we first started with, both of us kind of more the bodybuilding type splits. But I think a lot of women say they want like the Michelle Obama arms or like that lean definition around their triceps and stuff. That cut that you see is like your delts. So it's the shoulder leading into those biceps and triceps that's going to create that illusion. It is not because you're just cranking out tricep extensions to lose body fat on the back of your arm. So build your shoulders. Another overlooked one, I think, a lot for women is your lats. So your upper back, if you can build your upper back, it makes your lower back and your waist look smaller, right? So pull, and I guess I should put this caveat in. I'm about to say pull-ups. Pull-ups or lat pull-downs, do them properly. Don't let the weight pull you into a shrug or you're going to be building bigger traps, right? If you're using the wrong muscles.
It's probably not what most women want.
Correct. And I think that that's some of the fear that people have when they see like athletes who have those big, bulky looking upper. It's like they're training for a really cool sport that they're great at. They are not training for aesthetics. If you are training for aesthetics, pull your damn shoulder blades back and down on the bottom of that pull. Do not let the weight pull you up into a shrug or you're going to build it in the wrong spots. We need to make sure we're working the right muscles. But if you can do a lot of rows, one arm rows, T-bar, like field goal arm grip is what I call it, rows, pull-ups, lat pull-downs properly, building your lats is really cool in terms of the illusion that it can give for an hourglass figure. I talked about this in our Facebook group today. I filmed a video of myself doing lat pull downs in my gym the other day, and like my lighting down there is kind of dark, so you can see more shadows and stuff. And I was like, ugh, I don't mean to have back muscles like that, right? Like, I'm not training to try to look like, oh wow, my upper back really is shredded, right? My back doesn't look like that when I'm not mid-lift in the middle of a contraction. When I'm just walking around normal life with an open back shirt, it's pretty cool. I feel like my back looks pretty sexy because I've been training like this. It just looks lean. It doesn't look like some ripped bodybuilder. And I've been lifting now since like 2008. That's a long time.
Feminine in your clothes.
It still looks feminine.
Looking like a big bulky dude in their tank tops, and it's like no,
exactly.
I to look more like that, and I can't. Like, it's hard.
So that's exactly what I was going to say. If you can get yourself looking like that during your workouts when your muscles are pumped up and all that, when you go and you're living normal life, you're going to look lean and feminine and great and healthy. And again, this episode is all about aesthetics and how to look a certain way. There's so many other benefits metabolically to putting on more muscle, and your lats are big muscles. So there's function to it, there's health to it, but aesthetically, I think a lot of women don't realize the value of training their upper back, training their shoulders. And I do think now, like, big butts are popular because of Kardashians probably, but now I think a lot more women are prioritizing Bulgarian split squats and barbell squats and deadlifts and all that because they want to build glutes. For a long time, girls wanted smaller butts, right? So I think that piece has already been kind of achieved. But again, to create balance, you want to be symmetrical. You don't want to only train your lower half all the time. And then obviously there's the functional benefits on top of that.
I think something too that we didn't really talk about is, and we won't go too far into detail just because it's not the point of this episode, but we're talking about these movements and lunges and squats. This does not mean doing a 30-day squat challenge on Pinterest where every morning you get up and do 100 body weight squats. Right now, can that help? And does that have a place? Sure. Like, it's better than nothing. But if you're really trying to like build and shape your physique, you have got to heavy lifting and challenging yourself. I talked to my 11-year-old about this in his strength training class. He says like, oh, it feels easier now. And I'm like, well, that's good, right? That means you're progressing from your first weeks, right? I have him write his weights down, but I'm like, it should always be challenging.
Now it's time to bump up the
so we talked about that and increasing weights. And that's really what it should be, right? Like if it gets easier, right? Like more conditioning, whatever, that's one thing, but you have to keep challenging yourself. So in terms of like a rep range, I think for beginner lifters, like usually somewhere in like the 10 to 15 or 8 to 15 rep range is pretty fair, right? 3 to 4 sets of each movement in a lift. And that's also going to come down to how many days a week you're working out and things too, and your overall volume for the week. But that rep range is pretty fair, right? I guess it could be somewhere even in like 6 to 20 realistically with some variation going through there.
But when Jill is giving that rep range, that means, I know I've said this on other episodes, but I'm going to keep saying it. That means if you can keep going past that amount, you have to go heavier or you're not going to yield the benefits that you want. So if your rep range that you're targeting is 10 to 12 and you get to 12 and you're like, okay, I'm done because I hit 12. No, could you get 13, 14, 15? If so, you should be going heavier. If you only get to,
like, oh, I did 20-pound squat and I hit my 10 reps, I'm done. They did what they said. It's like, no, they should be fucking hard.
They should be really hard. Like you can barely get one more. And if your rep range is 10 to 12 and you can only get 8, okay, drop the weight for your next set so that you can get in that appropriate rep range. But like Jill said, there's a big rep range that can be effective. And then at that point, it becomes more nuanced. For your first 6 months to like 2 years, really, you can see pretty good results just following these basics without having to get too nuanced with programming. Once you have become pretty adapted to exercise, then the type of exercise you do becomes more and more important in terms of effective programming to make sure it is programmed so that you're progressing in volume over time.
For sure.
I guess I want to give you guys easy tips so that you're like, well, but what exercise plan should I do? Like you guys know, like we coach the whole person. So for our one-on-one coaching, we are doing deep dives in people's nutrition, stress management, sleep, all the things, and we're programming their workouts individually. If you are looking for just like good programming, I did do a programming, like how to build your own workout workshop, and it came with like an ebook that you guys could get if you want. We have the link on our website and on our Instagram pages and stuff. Other things that other people that I've learned a lot from, if you guys want to look into this more, Mike Matthews has a book called, there's 2 books. One is Bigger, Leaner, Stronger, and one is Thinner, Leaner, Stronger. Literally same concept. He just wrote Thinner, Leaner, Stronger because women don't want to get bigger, right? I learned a lot about programming when I started following that type of methodology that I learned from him when I started to incorporate more compound lifts, more 2 or 3 times a week rather than doing 5 body part splits a week. So that's a really good book that you can download or buy. And in the back of it, he has lots of programming recommendations. Again, he splits it up based on how many days can you be consistent per week. Other good ones, I've learned a lot from the Mind Pump guys. They have what they call MAPS, which are metabolic adaptation programming. But it's all based around the same concept. Any good program that you're following out there is going to start with the basics. Some sort of squat, some sort of hinge, some sort of push, some sort of pull. And it's going to progressively overload with time and hit every major muscle group, likely 15 to 20 hardworking sets per week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and these are like your these big lifts are like compound movements, right? But I want to be clear that when we use the word compound, this does not mean combining lunges and bicep curls, or those are not going to be as effective for you. When we're doing something like a squat, we're utilizing so many of our muscle groups in different capacities, right? When you're going through all of these, these big lifts that we're talking about. So these lifts are like the foundations of the programs that we build and design for clients, right? They're going to be based on these movement patterns and variations. Obviously, there's a ton of different ways to squat and deadlift and do all those things. And you might see one thing in a program. You might see, Bulgarian split squats in a program 1 month and not the next month, right? Like there's going to be some variation, but there's always going to be a version of a lunge or, we'll mix in like unilateral, right? Like single leg squats or single leg deadlifts or barbell deadlifts versus dumbbell deadlifts, right? So you're going to see all of those variations too. And it's funny, I had this conversation with a client a couple weeks ago. I realized that she was switching a lot of her barbell movements to dumbbells when she went to the gym because she was uncomfortable with the squat racks or they weren't accessible. And I was like, oh man, I wish I knew that. Because there is a reason that we're programming these different ways that we're moving and then these different movement patterns for people. So you got to do what you can do and what you have access to. Right? If you don't have access to a barbell, of course, that's the option that you're going to have. But there's a reason for that variation too. And then really, I think we mentioned this, but I just want to be clear that, there are different ways of progressive overload. And you can go back to our other episode that we recorded about that a couple weeks ago. But if you're new to lifting, it's really about lifting heavier for the first 1 to 2 years and assuming that you are eating enough food and have proper form in your movements in the gym too. But that's really what it's going to be about. You can put on 10 to 15 pounds of muscle in a year as a new lifter if you have everything else dialed in. Take advantage of that as a new lifter without being new stimulus, right? Like I can't put on that much muscle in a year anymore. Unless I am meticulous and perfect, and that's even still possibly a stretch. It's probably closer to 5 to 7 maybe a year for somebody who's a more seasoned lifter. So take advantage of that if you're new, utilizing progressive overload, eating enough protein, right? And then just knowing that you can't build muscle the way that we're explaining this in a calorie deficit. You've got to have, you can be at maintenance calories and especially if you're new, you could be in a slight deficit at that point, but you've got to have the calories to support everything that we're telling you.
And the protein specifically, protein and whole foods, guys. So yeah, you have to eat enough protein. You have to eat enough calories. What Jill just said about 10 to 15 pounds, again, I just want to insert here because I think a lot of women are like, no, I don't want to gain 10 pounds. Sure. It will not look like 10 pounds of body fat. Okay. So if you gain body fat,
lost weight.
yes, it will look like you lost weight. You will feel toned. You'll be like, oh, this is weird. I see a new defined line in my thigh or in my arm. Muscle does not take up space. It's more dense. So picture holding a pound of a rock versus a pound of cotton balls, right? The cotton balls are taking up way more space. Muscles like that, okay? So it's not going to make you physically bigger. Those 10 pounds are actually going to help you keep body fat off long term. So if you are in that position of being able to put on muscle, I would prioritize building 10 pounds of muscle any day before prioritizing losing 10 pounds of body fat. And it's going to make keeping body fat off easier.
Yeah, because so many women are like, I want to lose fat first and then I'll build muscle. And it's like, no. That's the total backwards thought process. And it's
make your life,
from getting results. It's going to be so much easier and so much more beneficial. And you're going to be so much happier with your physique if you start with focusing on building over fat loss. If you're in that point of life where you're trying to decide what direction do I go here with this?
And again, muscle is a calorie burning, expensive tissue to live on our body. The more of it you have, the more calories you burn all the time, the less work you have to do to make up for food eaten, right? It's going to make you be allowed to eat, not be allowed, but it will allow you to eat more and maintain your physique. And you'll be burning more calories. So train like you want to build muscle all the time, whether you are in a build phase or a fat loss phase. Train the way we're describing right here the entire time. Okay. Don't change your training up just because you're in a deficit.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you want to go through based on different body parts, what movements that we like to incorporate or some of your favorite movements? I know I have some that I love and some that I hate to do, but
sure.
The result
okay.
Anyway.
So I think both of us, I'm going back to the big 5, right? That we just talked about. I think both of us incorporate chest moves at least once a week, meaning bench presses, push-ups, flies, things like that. But that probably isn't on my big list here when it comes to the physique change, right? So I'm doing it at least once a week, but I'm not prioritizing it as much as the things I'm going to go over here. So for specifics, I would say the first one would be glutes and legs. For big compound movements, my favorites, barbell back squats. not on the Smith machine with a free bar, because if you can learn to do them properly, you're also working your abs while you work your glutes and your quads. So barbell back squats, barbell front squats for more quads and core, whereas back squats are a little more glutes and core for me. Barbell conventional and Romanian deadlifts. I like glute focused hyper extension. So like picture like a low back extension, but I'm really bracing in the
Kind of
core.
like bending over into a V, and then instead of typical hyperextension, it's kind of using your back more, right? But you can do glute focus where your shoulders are a little bit more rounded over and you're actually pulling yourself up with your glutes. That's one of my favorites too.
Yep. A barbell hip thrust or hip thrust machine, and all different varieties of hip thrusts. I actually did hip thrust today with body weight only, but I did an isometric hold and I supersetted it with my abductions, and I felt it. Okay. Even though I'm used to lifting, I could lift a couple 100 pounds in a hip thrust. My body weight I felt because of the way I programmed it, but all sorts of hip thrusts are going to isolate glutes. Step ups or any sort of deficit type single leg movement I love. So, any single leg movement like that is a squat variation. Okay. So like if you're doing walking lunges or rear lunges or anything like that, that's still a squat pattern on that one leg. So I really love step ups with control on the way back down. I'm not pushing off of that bottom leg. I really love deficit rear lunges with a barbell on my back, or just holding like a kettlebell or a dumbbell, like a goblet squat. Deficit rear lunges where my front foot is up higher. So I get a deeper stretch in that glute that is lifted. I like single leg presses for the same reason. So I'm able to get really, really deep in that one side and feel more of a stretch in my glutes specifically. And then again, single leg variations of all the things I just listed. So like Bulgarian split squats, B stance deadlifts, single leg deadlifts, walking lunges. Those are all like my big compound moves that I am incorporating one or two times. I'm incorporating almost all of them in, like at least one in every workout that I'm doing in my 3 workouts a week.
Yeah, for sure. I'm pretty similar. I have a love-hate with squats, and I think that's just because I tend to be very quad dominant. So I do a lot more like I said, glute hamstring specific movements. So hip thrusts are a big one. It's funny you said kind of what you incorporated, a variation of that. I incorporated, I might have texted the group of coaches about this, but I think I was doing a program with, barbell hip thrust. And then I was like supersetting it with single leg body weight hip thrust. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to die. This is awful. So there's little variations like that can be really powerful. And that's when body weight can be used very effectively, because we're obviously training, lifting heavy outside of that. But deadlifts are definitely a favorite for me. And, there's trap bar deadlifts, and there's sumo. I love sumo movements. There's sumo deadlifts. I also love the hyper extensions. I hate good mornings. I would literally rather do anything else. It's just a personal thing.
I love them. I love them for abs. So that was actually, I didn't like them before, but that was one of my favorite moves in training my brain to reconnect with my core postpartum. So I went pretty light. I would only use the bar for a while before I was able to go any heavier, but it taught me how to hinge again while bracing my abs better. Whereas jumping right into deadlifting, I was somehow not able to make that mental connection after having my babies. So yeah, for your core, again, when done right, I think squats and hinges have a really cool place there for ab work, which I think people overlook.
Yep. Yeah. And then, like you said, I think step ups are absolutely one of my favorites.
I love step ups. Same.
Yeah. Same, because you can do so many variations of those too. You can do lateral, right? You can do straight on. You can do so many different things. So yeah, I think those are awesome. And then I am impartial to any hamstring machine. I love going to
same.
I immediately am like, what hamstring machines do they have here that I haven't used in a while? So that's
I put isolation exercises here in another section. Perfect. And I have that on mine too. So with those compound lifts that we just talked about, or those big multi-joint movements, if you are programming, you don't want to do the same type of movement pattern, a lot of different exercises of that same thing in a day. Okay. So like today, for example, I did deficit lunges with a barbell on my back. I didn't also do step ups on the same day. I might do it another time this week, but I don't need to do that same exact type of thing. It would be more optimal. I just did a squat variation, right? Maybe it would be more optimal if I'm doing 3 full body days a week for me to now move on to a hinge variation. and then a push and a pull, right? We don't need to repeat all these things. If you're like, okay, I want glutes. They told me these 5 exercises hit glutes. You don't have to do all of those on one day. You will probably end up overtraining or neglecting the other things that are also important for balance.
That's a good point. So, in terms of how many sets you're doing total in a lift or how long your lift is, I think typically our programs tend to be somewhere in like the 18 to maybe like 25 sets total, sometimes a little bit more depending on like warm-ups and things if you're counting those or not. But if it's on the lower end, it's typically because I'm training more days per week, or I had some really low rep ranges in like lifts, earlier on, like my compound lifts at the beginning of my workout. But
meaning she went really, really heavy, so she's fatigued herself, so she doesn't need to go.
I don't have enough energy to do all the isolation and accessory movements outside of that. But that's also a very specific. I don't train like that every month, right? But I would say probably like 20 to 22 maybe is like fair. Would you say that's kind of like where you land?
I think that's fair for you and I, as people have been lifting for 10 to 15 years. I think for most women, like 15 to 20. Some women who are just starting, I'll have them at 12 to 15 working sets a week. 12 to 15 working sets a week. And they're like, this doesn't feel hard. And I'm like, yeah, I know it doesn't feel hard, but every set should feel really hard, right? Because they're not used to
like that like acclimation period where they're not challenging themselves enough quite yet.
And their bodies see great results because they haven't been adapted to this type of training before, right? Like you and I kind of have to push ourselves with higher volume because our bodies are adapted at this point. So anywhere between, I would say between 10 on the very low end, between 10 and 22, 25 working sets per week. And again, 20 to 25 is for a more advanced lifter. And when I say advanced lifter, it doesn't mean you've been going to group exercise classes for 10 years. It means you've been lifting really heavy with like 60 to 120 second breaks in between every lift. 1 to 2 minute breaks. I don't know why I said that in seconds. Long breaks in between. Okay, guys. And you're really pushing yourself as hard as you can. Like that's, and you're being consistent, right? Like when I had my kids with Logan, I started having contractions way early and they were triggered when I was training lifting sessions in person. So I had to stop lifting because it was physically, and this does not happen usually. If you're working out at the same like intensity that you were before pregnancy, you should be fine. I was for my first kid. With Logan, I had to stop lifting. The cool part is then when you get back into it, you can start back with very little volume and see pretty cool results. So like when I went back into it, I did not train 20 hardworking sets per muscle group per week. I did very basic stuff and my body started to change quickly because it wasn't adapted to that stimulus, right? So even though I'm advanced in what I know in terms of lifting and I've done it for a long time, if you just take a month or two off, you're back to beginner status, which is cool in terms of muscle adaptation.
Yeah, I like that. Same thing. I think I ease in with like, after periods off, maybe 10 to 12 sets for the first couple of weeks and then kind of working my way back up.
So isolation exercises for lower body. I used to program calves all the time when I did like bodybuilding type splits. Now I feel like just doing deadlifts and squats, maintain them fine. And I don't want them to get bigger. So I don't do that much. But if you are fairly lean and you want more defined calves, do calf raises, do them on a step or a machine where your heels can drop lower for a deeper range of motion. For the big muscle groups, leg extension machines, hamstring curl machines, all of them, kneeling, lying, seated hamstring curl machines.
Yeah, there's so many variations.
Hamstring curls on a stability ball lying on the floor. Leg press machines is a seated version of a squat, right? So any of those things are great. I tend to like to isolate some sort of abduction or donkey kickback type,
like about the abductor and adductor machines.
Like contracting your glutes in a way versus extending them, which they extend in a squat. In a donkey kickback, they contract, right? So some sort of like cable kickback or abduction machine. I didn't train those for a while because I was like, well, I'm getting plenty of work in my squats and my deadlifts. And then I started following Brett Contreras' program just to see what he was all about because I'm like, okay, this guy's like, he's a dweeb about science. I appreciate him for that. But I don't love all of his programming methodologies as a trainer. And it was fun. Adding those little isolation things for glutes, I actually noticed a difference. So I started adding them more after following his program for just a few months. So So shout out to him. Glute kickbacks and abductions. Adduction, I do not add for physique at all, but I found to be very helpful functionally. Again, postpartum when my pelvis was all jacked up and weak after having babies. So abduction and isolated glutes, I dig.
Yeah, I agree on from a functional standpoint. And then I didn't mention like there's like hack squats or reverse hack squats, right? Some other variations. There's so many other machines.
For quads, yeah.
The glute ham raises, yeah. So there's a lot of different ones that you can do. Just glute bridges, which is, raising your butt up, laying flat on the floor. You could do it with a barbell or a dumbbell or body weight. There's bands. There's so many different things that you can do. But yeah, I think those are some of my favorites. And then
and again, all those isolated exercises we just listed, if you only have so much time in the gym, always prioritize the other ones we said first. Prioritize the big compound ones first. So anytime you are doing a big compound move, you're also hitting the accessory muscles. So we're about to get into upper body next. But for example, anytime you bench press or do a push-up, you're also working your triceps. You don't need to spend hours in the gym doing tricep kickbacks. Now, if you have time at the end of your workout and you want to isolate them, go for it. But you don't have to. Anytime you're doing a row or a pull-up, any type of pull, you're also working your biceps. So that's, again, why we prioritize in this way. It makes sense, but it also is going to save you time in the gym because you're hitting multiple things at once.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, upper body. Let's go back. One of my favorites, but least favorites because I love training back. I think it's my favorite workout day. However, I am at a point in life where I don't necessarily need to focus on growing that anymore. And I was almost hesitant to even say that on the podcast because I don't want anyone to be like, no, I don't want my back to get bigger. Jill said not to train anymore. I still train my back with intensity every single week, just like we said about chest. But it's just not.
But not multiple times a week with intention to build. You're doing it once a week. Still hard to maintain. That's how I am now with chest. So yeah, for your lats and your upper back, lat pull downs, pull ups or chin ups again with a back focused, and it matters how they're done. Don't let it turn into a shrug for your traps. Single arm rows or cable rows. Different grips to your rows. So I like a regular grip, a T-bar grip, or like I call them field goal arms. Supine underhand grip is going to isolate your biceps a little bit more. If you can try to look muscular on your back, you are going to end up with like that lean, sexy, toned back look. Okay. For lower back, again, I already mentioned hyperextensions in my other one because I like that for my glutes. But that works your whole posterior chain, your whole back of body. But again, I think lats are heavily neglected by women when they say they want a certain physique because they're nervous.
Yep, I agree. I think it is definitely one of the more underrated body parts to train or muscles to train. I agree. I don't know that I have too much to add to that. I mean, there's lots. Gyms definitely have so many different row and pull down like machines and variations to play with, but really you just need dumbbells and if you have a barbell, great. In terms of training your back effectively, I always say like, okay, we have dumbbells. That's what we're going to work with, right? We'll utilize resistance bands to mimic movements like lat pull downs if you're training at home and don't have access to like a cable tower. But your program's only going to get better and better the more equipment you have access to, right? So if you've got cable access where the cable tower can operate from the top and the bottom, a barbell and dumbbells, you can have such a killer back workout and have endless variations for a very long time for the way that you need to train and to train effectively. And then pull-ups, right? Like if you have a rack, some type of bar for those things. But there are so many variations you can do. But yeah, I mean.
Oh, you know what I like that we forgot to write down? I love dumbbell pullovers. That's something that I incorporate quite a bit. And it's because people can do it at home with just a dumbbell and hit their lats in that extended stretch position before pulling. But I like it for mobility too. Like I think a lot of times we spend time rounded at our computers, at our TVs, whatever, looking at our phones. And that kind of stretches me in the opposite position. And it also is super core effective. So if you're doing it properly, embracing your abs as you pull, you're going to feel your abs the next day in addition to your lats. That's one I forgot to write down, but I do pretty frequently.
No, yeah, I agree. That's another good one. I just did like pen lay rows, and that was another like row variation.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't done a long.
I hate those. I don't do them, but
they're the worst. I videoed them to put them in our form channel actually for with our clients, just because I hadn't done them in a while, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to record all my sets and see like How are these looking? Because I haven't done them in a while. I just want to make sure my form is good.
Effective but challenging.
Yeah.
Also like those big pull movements that we talked about. So anytime you're lifting a heavy barbell deadlift, you are first engaging with your lats just to hold that bar into place properly.
Have we not mentioned deadlifts for back?
So like deadlifts, right? We put it in the glutes section, but that is a back exercise through and through, right? That is working your entire back of body. Again, one reason we like to start with big compound movements because you're getting more out of your workouts. So every time you're gripping that bar, you should be pulling your shoulders back and kind of engaging those lats to brace you before you drive forward with the hips. If your upper back is tired and feels sore the next day after a deadlift, you are likely doing it right.
Absolutely.
Okay, so shoulders are the last one. So we broke this into 3 parts really for hey, what exercises to do for a snatched waist and tight physique. It should be glutes, hamstrings, quads, big muscles. Back, don't forget about your lats. And then the third one is your shoulders. So delts. Any and all overhead press variations. So barbell overhead presses, dumbbell overhead presses, Arnold presses. This is a more advanced one, but I really like behind the head overhead presses. If you have the mobility to be able to do them safely, I like that because it works the back of my shoulders in a little bit of a different way than the front more chest focused barbell one. Those are like the big compound ones, right? It's pretty basic. You're pushing something overhead. I like doing kettlebell overhead presses, especially for people who are concerned about their posture, because what it does is if you're holding that kettlebell and the weight is behind your wrist as you're pressing overhead, it actually is going to pull you slightly back pull your shoulder back into place there in your scapula, and help you with that mobility. So I like using kettlebells for them. Those are kind of the big ones for delts. And then I include isolated delt exercises at least once a week also. I'm kind of big on that because I think I notice it physique wise. So lateral, rear, front delt raises. I personally include more lateral and rear delts because I am more in a front rounded position holding babies and at my computer or whatever. Not to say that doesn't need strengthened in good posture, but I don't incorporate front raises as frequently as the other two because I think I get them in other places like my push movements and all. But those 3, lateral raises, rear raises, front delt raises, and then you can challenge them in a million different ways, right? Like do normal sets with heavy weight and rest. Do them like drop sets. Do them adding an isometric hold or a pulse at the end of each set. Like all of those are going to make them more and more challenging and feel hard. Like they're small movements, they're small muscles. I mean, you're not going to be lifting 20-pound weights for these. Like they're challenging. Maybe Jill will, but they are challenging small muscles. But if you keep training them again, physique wise, it will make people be like, whoa, her arms are so lean. What's she been doing? And it's like, you've actually built muscle in your shoulder.
Yeah. And there's definitely a lot of variations too of like overhead press, right? That main lift. Push press is another one that I like, which is just a variation. I like to do clean and press or that can be a variation of almost like a deadlift all the way up to an overhead press. Arnold presses are like one of my favorites, just another variation. Like Jess said, I'm always doing lateral raises, probably definitely 1 to 2 times a week. And then also to mention, just like we said, deadlifts for also your back and your glutes. Bench press is also another one that's very effective. For utilizing and recruiting shoulders. So again, tying back into the compound lifts or those big 5, you're always going to hit your shoulders, and then doing the isolation stuff at the end is going to be just that much more volume right towards that body part. So yeah, there's a ton of variations of raises and overhead press. But
you've noticed here that if we're talking about getting a leaner physique and abs and toned arms, we have never once mentioned here isolated ab exercises. Is it important to brace your core when you're lifting for a stable functional core? Absolutely. But you do not need to just hammer those little tiny ab muscles to try to grow them. Like you're not going to lose the belly fat on top. Focus on these other muscles instead. And then I guess the last takeaway, we've touched on each of these things, but I just want to kind of like recap with this. It is essential that you get enough recovery, enough sleep, even enough rest in between every set to be able to recover to lift heavy on your next set. Enough recovery, enough protein, and enough calories and or whole real foods to then build that muscle. It will not happen if you are chronically eating 1,000 calories and depriving your body. Protein are the building blocks of any and all tissue in our body. It's not just muscle. It's like if you want better nails and the cells that make up our organs, like all of those things are built on amino acids that come from protein. So protein, aim for 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight per day. For some people, that might feel unrealistic until you get to a healthy body weight. So just do the best that you can to eat more, and eat real foods. Don't be scared of potatoes and rice and oats and like carbs. Healthy carbs and healthy fats are not the enemy. They will fuel you. They will make your brain work well. They will help your hormones. But try to eat a lot of things that look like the plant or animal they came from, and you'll be better off in general. So feed up to get fit.
And don't do cardio thinking that you're going to look leaner and more toned. You have to have the muscle just doesn't come out of thin air. Respectfully, runners don't typically look like muscular and toned, right? They do tend to look lean because they're doing so much of what they're doing, but it's not going to achieve the look that you
The
like.
sculpted, like beach body type thing that you're picturing is it's not sculpted, right? It's just a smaller version of what you already have. You have to build something underneath to have that tone. So
we hope that was helpful. You can grab the workshop in the links of the podcast episode if you want to learn how to build that out on your own. And as always, if you guys have questions, you know where to find us on Instagram, and we will see you next time.